Draco Malfoy and the Truth of the Heart. Draco will hear about this. Chapter 8. The Locket. Draco! Draco startled at the sound of Harry's voice tone urgent, and then he was shaken roughly, making his stomach turn. His eyes fluttered open, and he moaned, shielding his eyes against the bright light blinding him. Thank God, Harry breathed, ceasing the bloody manhandling. You're not hurt, are you? I don't think so, Draco muttered, slowly lifting his hand from his eyes to blink up at Harry's pale face. Good, Harry nodded, because Ron got splinched. That had Draco alert within seconds, and he sat up quickly, ignoring the way his head spun at the movements. He realized they were in some kind of forest, and a couple of feet from them Hermione was cradling Weasley's too-still body, his shirt blood-stained and torn at the sleeve, where Draco could see a wound freshly healed. His skin had an unhealthy grayish tint to it, and Hermione was trembling as she held him tenderly. What happened? Draco asked, his voice soft. Where are we? The woods where they held the Quidditch World Cup, she answered shakily. It was the first place I could think of. Oh, Draco muttered, nodding. We can't go back to Grimmauld Place, she whispered. Yaxley grabbed me and followed me through the Blue Connection, and I was only able to shake him over the doorstep. It's okay, Draco cut her off, understanding exactly what that meant. They had let Yaxley into the house, meaning it wasn't safe any longer. It's not your fault. Hermione sniffled close to tears, and Draco reached out to squeeze her shoulder. Then he got up and started casting protection spells around them. He and Hermione had researched them together and had practiced them so much that they could probably now do them in their sleep. Harry, he asked quietly between spells, could you get the tent? The tent? Harry asked, looking flabbergasted. In Hermione's bag, Draco clarified, gesturing to the small beaded bag lying not far from him on the ground. Of course. Harry muttered, shaking himself and picking it up. He summoned the tent as Draco continued casting. I thought this belonged to that bloke Perkins at the Ministry, he asked. Apparently he didn't want it back. His lumbagus so bad, Hermione murmured, eyes still on Weasley. So Ron's dad said I could borrow it. Right, Harry muttered, frowning at the tent. How do I... Put it down and step back, Draco instructed, turning when Harry scrambled to his feet, dropping the tent to the floor. He pointed his wand at it and called, Haricto! The tent started to construct itself, and Draco turned away again, finishing their protection spells. When did you become such a handyman? Harry asked, sounding stunned. When I knew I needed to prepare myself for an infinite time on the run with you, Draco snorted. Cave inimicum, he called, pointing his wand over his head. Did I forget anything, Hermione? I didn't think so, Hermione shrugged. Though honestly, I wasn't listening half the time. It's okay, Draco said. I think I've got everything. It was then that Weasley groaned, and all their gazes flew to his face. His eyes opened slowly, and Hermione's hand went to stroke some sweaty hair from his face. How'd you feel? She whispered. Lousy, Weasley groaned, his healthy arm going to his injured one, grimacing. Where are we? Draco turned away from them, deciding to let Hermione have that moment. Instead, he took Harry's hand and pulled him into the tent. He came, though a little unwillingly. Did we get the locket? He asked him in a hushed voice. Oh, Harry said, nodding. He pulled it out from his pocket, handing it to Draco. Yes, Hermione dropped it when she was tending to Ron, and I picked it up. Draco frowned, examining the object in his hand. It was large and golden, and the letter S, pointing to the Slytherin family, was inlaid with emeralds. He hesitated, then he tried to pry it open. It wouldn't budge, just as expected. He closed his fist around it, feeling the dark magic emanate from it, making him feel slightly nauseous. There was also something else. I feel a pulse, Draco whispered. It's as if it's alive. Harry blinked, holding out his hand, and Draco gave him the locket to feel it for himself. When he did, Harry's eyes widened. We probably need to open it to be able to destroy it, Draco frowned. But even if we manage that, destroying it won't be easy. I've been working on a theory, but I was only able to unearth bits and pieces of it. Draco bit his lip. Well, Harry shrugged, all business now. We'll have to keep it safe until we work out how to destroy it. With that, he got to his feet, pulling the chain around his neck. Wait! Draco called, alarmed. You can't wear it! Don't you remember what happened with the diary? Draco, you used the diary, Harry said softly. You wrote in it and made yourself vulnerable. I'll just wear it to keep it safe. But isn't that using it too? Draco argued. I don't like this. Can't we just keep it in Hermione's bag? We could lose Hermione's bag. Harry shook his head. We can't risk to lose the Horcrux. Draco frowned, but didn't know how to reproach that argument. Come on, Harry said. Let's get Ron in here and into bed. He needs to rest. And with that, he pushed past Draco and left the tent, effectively ending their discussion. They were unable to change location as long as Weasley was recovering, so they stayed in their little hideout, taking turns between the three of them to keep a watchful eye out to make sure no one approached their tent, even though technically they should be well enough protected through their enchantments. Still, despite their seemingly uneventful couple of days, things between them became quite turbulent. Weasley was being a right moody both due to his injury and the general lack of food. Hermione had educated herself on edible plants, berries, and mushrooms throughout the summer, and was trying her best to serve them something every day, and Draco did his best to help, looking up spells and trying to remember what little he'd been taught by his aunt in the kitchen, but it was no use with the lack of ingredients, and Weasley made his displeasure about that known. Hermione naturally took his criticism to heart the most, both because it was Weasley, and because out of the four of them he needed the food the most to recover. Honestly, if Weasley hadn't been injured, he'd have ripped him a new one. The other diva in their makeshift camp turned out to be Harry. His mood had taken a sudden downturn after they arrived in the forest, if due to being stationary and without a roof over their head, or due to the fact that they had no clue on how to destroy the Horcrux. Draco did not know, but it was very noticeable. The fact that finally Draco and Hermione had their little talk with him about Godric's Hollow might have had something to do with it too. They had put it off and off. The opportunity hadn't presented itself at the Burrow under Miss Weasley's watchful eyes, and at Grimmauld Place Harry had been distracted by a different task. But now he had made his desire to go known once more, and they couldn't keep quiet any longer. It had gone over as splendidly as they had imagined, even with Draco's participation. Harry was now often found sulking alone in corners, and when approached about a topic, his answers would be short and flippant. He didn't let Draco reach out to him either. It seemed like they were back to their prior stage at Grimmauld Place, with Harry avoiding him at all costs, and Draco felt so tired and so confused. After a couple of days, Harry woke them up in the middle of the night with a new vision of the Dark Lord's search for Gregorovitch. It turned out that he had been successful in finding the old wand maker, only to learn that whatever he'd been looking for with Gregorovitch had been stolen from him. He read Gregorovitch's mind, and I saw this young bloke perched on a windowsill, he told Draco and Weasley. Hermione had stormed out angrily, still disapproving vocally of the fact that Harry was not attempting to close his mind from the Dark Lord's thoughts and emotions. And he fired a curse at Gregorovitch and jumped out of sight. He stole it. He stole whatever you-know-who's... Harry had bent to Weasley's demands to stop using the name for now. Weasley insisted that it was bad luck. After. And I think I've seen him somewhere before. Draco frowned, scanning Harry's face. Where do you think you've seen him? Draco asked. He's most probably from the continent. I don't know. Harry shrugged, biting his lip. Couldn't you see what the thief was holding? Weasley asked. No. Harry shook his head. It must have been something small. All right, Weasley said, looking unsure. You don't reckon you know who's after something else to turn into a Horcrux? I thought 7 was his magic number. Draco frowned. Why would he make another one? The diary's gone. Weasley shrugged. Draco hummed, considering the possibility. But wouldn't it be dangerous for him to make another one? Harry asked. Didn't Hermione say he had pushed his soul to the limit already? He has, Draco agreed. He might not be aware of that, though. Yeah, maybe. Harry breathed. They fell into an uncomfortable silence, the implications of the new information whirling through their minds. He heard both Weasley and Harry drift back into sleep eventually, but Draco lay awake for a long time listening to them breathing. He wished he and Harry were still sharing beds. Maybe it would be easier for him to sleep. As soon as Weasley felt well enough to walk, they decided to change their location every couple of days. The walks were long and tiring, but at least it gave them something else to do than sit around and snap at each other. They had also found a couple of opportunities to snatch food from somewhere. Some eggs from a farm here, bread from a warehouse there. But it was rare and never enough, and Draco could feel the lack of food tearing on all of their moods. So he suggested a trip for himself and Harry to a nearby Muggle town. It was a small market town, and it happened to be a Saturday, and Draco was sure they'd be able to slip under the masses and buy some food to last them through the week. It's dangerous, Hermione sighed as she handed Draco enough of her Muggle savings to last them. Are you sure? Quite sure, Draco nodded. We can't survive for long on mushrooms and herbs, Hermione, as much as we want to. We need some sustenance. Be careful, she said urgently, making sure you're not seen. We will. Draco smiled at her before turning to Harry. Ready? Harry nodded wordlessly, not meeting his eyes. Draco tried to gulp down the feeling of anger and hurt at the continued silent treatment. Great, he said, faking cheerfulness. Let's go then. He held out his arm for Harry, who took it reluctantly. And then they apparated. Right into a horde of Dementors! What the? Draco hissed, shaking his wand into his hand. Expecto Patronum! His Arctic fox immediately materialized, chasing away the nearest Dementors, keeping them at bay. On Harry's side, though, they kept approaching, and Draco looked over at him, noting that Harry was just standing next to him, frozen and pale. What are you doing? Draco called. Cast! Harry raised his wand slowly, whispering the spell with a feeble voice. Nothing happened. Draco blinked. Due to his lack of focus, his fox faded from existence. What the? Draco muttered. He grabbed his wand a little tighter with sudden determination, thinking of the way Harry had held him on the Hogwarts grounds, had kissed him as if he'd wanted to imprint his feelings onto Draco, had wanted to make up for all the time he had spent not kissing him. Expecto Patronum! Draco called, and his fox was back brighter than ever before, its light so blinding that Draco had to shield his eyes against it. He could hear the Dementors retreating, and when he lowered his hand again, they were alone on the hill facing the town. His fox was sitting at their feet, staring up at them curiously, as if waiting for further instructions. Draco smiled at it, and it faded from existence. My Patronus, Harry whispered to him, sounding shell-shocked. It wouldn't come. I tried, and it just wouldn't... But why? Draco asked, thunderstruck. You haven't had problems with that spell since third year. How come now of all times? I don't know, okay? Harry yelled, lashing out at him. Gosh, can you stop pretending like I'm supposed to have all the answers? I never... Draco started, but Harry didn't let him finish. You keep fussing and sticking your nose in where you're least wanted, and I'm sick of it. Harry snapped. Draco stared at him, feeling as if he'd been slapped. His heart was beating so loudly in his ears that it felt impossible to string a thought together. It was then that Draco's eyes fell on the locket around Harry's neck, and the logical part of Draco's brain tried to call his attention back to it. It was hard, pushing through the panic that was building up inside of him, but finally, something clicked inside of him. Take off the locket, he muttered. What? Harry snapped. Take it off, Draco insisted. Before I take it off you! I'm serious, Harry! Harry growled, but he did as Draco said, pulling the chain over his head in angry movements and practically throwing it in Draco's face. The other boy barely caught it, waiting wearily, watching as Harry froze, his eyes clearing and his face slacking. Better? Draco asked, an edge to his voice. Yeah, Harry muttered, bringing a hand up to his chest and rubbing at it, an absent-minded look on his face. He caught Draco's eyes, suddenly seeming horrified. Crap, he muttered. I'm sorry, I didn't mean any of that. I figured, Draco muttered, though it was slightly stiff. He was still smarting from the verbal attack. I told you, wearing this was dangerous. Draco slipped the locket into his jeans pocket and turned away from Harry. Come on, he said. Let's get some food and return to the tent before the Dementors return, possibly with Death Eaters in tow. They got as much food as they could carry, Harry throwing Draco wounded looks all through the trip. Then they returned to the tent and to their waiting friends, Draco telling them about the incident and the locket-related discovery. Maybe Harry was just wearing it for too long? Hermione bit her lip, her eyes roaming her friend's face as if she was expecting to find any after effects. We should take turns. We should not wear it at all, Draco argued. It's too dangerous. After what we went through to get it, Weasley demanded. I did not lose a chunk of my arm for you to gamble the thing away again, Malfoy. Is it really so much of a risk to keep it somewhere that's not around our necks? Draco argued in zest. We have pockets, bags, whatever. It could slip out, Hermione sighed. Or we can lose the bag. We can't keep wearing it, Draco called. We'll have to be more careful, Hermione agreed. Keep an eye out for each other. No more than 12 hours at a time, and as soon as someone shows signs of losing control, we switch. Deal? Sounds good to me, Harry muttered, though he did not meet Draco's eyes. Most likely he knew that Draco would disapprove. Whatever, Draco sighed, handing the locket to Hermione. But you'll be the guinea pig. I want to see how well you'll fare with your 12 hours before I agree. Fair enough, Hermione nodded, taking the locket and putting it on, hiding it under her sweater. Draco rolled his eyes before storming into the tent, busying himself in the kitchen. He was starting to cut some onions for dinner when Harry came up behind him, timidly asking, "Draco?" "Not now, Harry," Draco hissed in an abysmally bad mood. The last thing he needed now was dealing with Harry's guilt over treating Draco like crap while under the influence of the locket. Harry was silent for a long moment before pushing on. "Do you need help?" Draco shrugged, gesturing to the potatoes he had taken out of their shopping bags. "Peel those if you want to," he said. "I'm frying them with some onions and bacon. Should be filling enough for His Royal Highness King Weaselby, shouldn't it?" Harry didn't say anything. Instead, he silently got to work, effectively peeling and cutting the potatoes and silently watching Draco as he applied the basic cooking charms he'd learned from his aunt and fried the lot. They did not exchange a word for the rest of the day. Hermione handed the locket to Draco the next morning after he'd woken up. "It feels strange," she warned him. "It messes with your head a little, but I think it's manageable if we stick to short intervals." "If you say so," Draco grumbled, slipping the chain over his own head. He felt a heaviness settle over him as the locket came to rest against his chest, and he took an unsteady breath. "Tell me if you start feeling funny," Hermione instructed. "We can end your turn earlier, if necessary." Draco nodded, and then she was off. Her turn to prepare their breakfast. Draco spent the meal in silence, feeling strangely secluded from the group, as if there was a wall separating him from them. It was good food, eggs, buttered toast, and bacon, but it tasted like ash in his mouth. He listened to them talk amongst themselves, and after a while their voices became stifling. So as soon as they were busy cleaning up, he used the distraction to slip away, eager for some peace and quiet. No one noticed. Of course no one noticed. No one ever noticed Draco's absence. They were probably relieved to be rid of him for a while. What had Harry said? "You keep fussing and sticking your nose in where you're least wanted, and I'm sick of it." He had said that under the influence of the locket, but had the locket really made him lie? After all, Harry had been behaving strangely for a while. He had distanced himself from Draco bit by bit, had refused his comfort where he had once searched it, had lashed out at him where he had once been gentle. That hadn't started with the locket. That had been there for a while. Maybe Harry just didn't want him around any longer. The thought made it hard for Draco to draw air. He walked and walked, unable to see where he was going. What was he supposed to do if Harry didn't want him anymore? He had given up everything for him. He didn't have a life without Harry. He didn't want a life without Harry. Then again, was he really surprised? Part of him had always known he wasn't good enough. There had always been Weasley there to remind him for sure, to show him up wherever he was lacking, and to point out that really he should have never been part of their little group. And if he was being honest, when had any of them ever really listened to him? He was there, sure, handy in his skills and intellect, but when it came to making decisions, his input was constantly ignored. He had never been as important as Weasley or Hermione, even if Harry had always denied that sentiment. He was there, but he was not really there, not in the ways that mattered. Draco came to a sudden halt. He had reached a pond, the water surface glistening in the sunlight, beckoning him. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. He should never have been part of their group. It was all because he had willfully inserted himself into it. If he hadn't gotten the letter, Harry would have hated him, and he would have become Lucius Malfoy's son. It would have played the part that had been shoved at naught. That's what he should have done. He'd just been too much of a coward, too selfish. He should make it right. He should just disappear and let Harry and the others live the life they were supposed to live. The water seemed to be calling out to him. His heart was racing as he stepped closer and closer to the pond, and then into it, as if in a trance. The coldness barely hit him. Soon it will be over, he thought. Soon everything will be as it should be. He didn't hear the voices until he was waist deep in the water. He held in, listening as they came closer. "Draco?
Draco, answer me!"
"Draco, where are you?" Harry and Hermione. So his absence had been noticed after all. He frowned, trying to clear his mind, but he couldn't string a thought together. His vision was swimming too. He hadn't realized that he was crying. On his wrist he felt heat insistently flaring up. Harry was trying to reach him through their bracelets. "Draco! Oh my god, what are you doing in the water?" It was Hermione's voice. Slowly Draco turned around, seeing Hermione run towards him through the trees, her bushy hair wild and her face anxious. "We've been looking for you everywhere," she called. "Why did you suddenly disappear? You scared us." "Don't come closer," Draco breathed. "What?" Hermione asked, coming to a reluctant halt. "Don't come closer," Draco repeated, his voice cracking. Hermione stared at him. Draco could see that she looked seriously frightened. "What are you doing in the water, Draco?" she asked once more, her voice urgent. "It's freezing." Draco didn't have an answer. Instead, all he managed to get out was a choked, "Leave me alone." Hermione's eyes widened and she paled. Then she raised her voice and yelled at the top of her lungs, "Harry! Harry, he's here!"
"Hermione!"
came the muffled answer. "Please!" Hermione called. "Please get over here now!" Draco automatically took a step backwards, further into the water. He couldn't face Harry. Hermione shook her head, alarmed. "No!" she called, reaching out her hand as if to stop him. "Please, Draco, don't come closer!" Draco hissed, his voice sharp. "Then don't do anything stupid!" she moaned. "Please just stay where you are!" "Why do you care?" Draco demanded. "It's not like anybody would care if I'm gone!" Hermione looked stricken at that, and it was in that moment that Harry burst through the trees, out of breath and eyes wild.
"Hermione?"
he called, and then his eyes landed on Draco, and an expression of absolute horror settled on his face.
"Draco?"
he breathed.
"What are you doing?"
"It's the locket, Harry," Hermione said as she sounded close to tears. "I think it affects him more than it affects us. He was once possessed by a Horcrux after all. Maybe he's more vulnerable to advances because his soul has already been breached."
"Crap!" Harry cursed. "We should have thought of that."
"We need to get the locket off him," Hermione said, "before he hurts himself."
"Draco?"
Harry addressed him very gently, taking a step forward. All that did, though, was make Draco recoil, so Harry held in, eyes wide. Draco was now chest deep in the water.
"Draco, please,"
he breathed.
"get out of there."
"Why should I?" Draco challenged. "It's not like you care."
"What are you talking about?"
Harry asked, making a good job of sounding despaired. Not that Draco fell for it.
"Of course I care."
"You never wanted me here to begin with," Draco yelled. "You tried to break up with me for months! You've ignored me for weeks! Just admit that you want me gone!" Harry paled.
"No,"
he whispered, shaking his head.
"That's not... You've got this all wrong."
"I was just a face to you, and we both know it!" Draco yelled, barely able to breathe. He was sobbing so hard. "I should never have been part of your little group. If I just disappear..."
"No one wants you gone, Draco,"
Harry called, and his voice was shaking now.
"Least of all me. I need you."
"Liar!" Draco yelled. "You're just saying that so I won't... You just want to save me again. I was always just a charity case. You never really wanted me."
"That's not true, and you know it."
Harry shook his head, his voice hardening now.
"I'm very sorry for this, Draco, but you're not yourself right now, and I need to put an end to this for your own safety."
And with that, Harry withdrew his wand and shot a binding hex at him. Draco was not prepared, yelling as the ropes slung around his arms and legs, incapacitating him. He wobbled dangerously, but Harry had already lunged out, catching him and making sure that Draco didn't topple over into the water.
"I'm sorry,"
he whispered, leaning in to kiss his forehead.
"It will be okay in a moment, I promise."
And then he took hold of the locket and pulled it over Draco's head. The effect was immediate. It was like a weight had been lifted from his chest, and the clouds of despair scattered a little, clearing his mind and allowing rational thought once more. He felt the cold with a sudden numbing intensity. He felt Harry's body against his, arms wrapping around his trembling form as he freed him from his bonds and pulled him into a tight embrace. Harry was still holding the locket in his hand, though, and he could sense the dark magic reaching for him. Draco tried to scramble away from it, whimpering, and Harry froze, understanding dawning on him after only a moment.
"Hermione,"
he said, turning to face their horrified friend. Draco saw that she, too, was crying, though she tried to compose herself.
"Take this, please."
She nodded, summoning the locket. It flew into her hand. "You should get out of the water," she suggested, her voice small. "You will both catch death."
"You're right,"
Harry muttered, one hand moving up to Draco's hair, gently cradling his head as he pulled away slightly to look at him. Harry's eyes were wet too, but he was clearly trying to keep it together for Draco's sake.
"Draco,"
he said softly,
"let's get out of here and back to the tent, okay?"
Draco gave an awkward jerk in response, something between a shrug and a nod, but he was shaking too violently to make either work. Harry gently but firmly led him out of the water and back onto dry land. As soon as they stepped out of the pond, Hermione pointed her wand at Draco and cast a drying charm on him. The dampness disappeared in a heartbeat, his clothes stiff and uncomfortable as a result, but the coldness remained.
"Thanks,"
Harry muttered after he had undergone the same treatment. His hand was rubbing insistent circles into Draco's back.
"Let's get him under some blankets. He's ice cold."
Hermione nodded, turning on her heels and leading the way. Harry applied some pressure on Draco's lower back, urging him to move as well, which he did, as if under imperious. The walk back to the tent was longer than he would have anticipated. He hadn't thought he had walked that far. All the while, Harry did not let go of him. As the tent came into sight, Hermione hurried ahead, disappearing inside. She reappeared with Weasley in tow, who was frowning, eyebrows raising when he caught sight of Draco. You wondered what he looked like. It couldn't be good for Weasley to look at him that way. "We'll give you some privacy, Harry," Hermione said in a hushed tone, as if Draco wasn't standing right there. "Then you can—" She threw a glance at Draco but cut herself off, chewing on her lip. "Just take care of him, will you?" She added an edge to her voice.
"I will,"
he promised, his arm tightening around Draco. She nodded, and then she linked her arm with Weasley's and dragged him after her, disappearing into the woods. Harry looked sideways at Draco, but Draco did not meet his eyes.
"Let's get you warm and cozy,"
Harry muttered, gently manhandling him forward and through the tent opening. Draco was barely aware of what he was doing. Harry was handing him clothes, and Draco was changing into them, and then he held up the blanket, and Draco slipped under it, unnumb to the softness of the mattress or the warmth of the covers. For the first time since they had left Grimmauld Place, though, Harry slipped into bed with him, pulling him against his chest to keep him close. Harry was much warmer than the blankets. A long silence stretched out between them. Then Harry whispered, his voice rough and raw.
"Draco, I'm so sorry."
Draco wanted to ask what he was sorry for. After all, it had been Draco who had been too weak to resist the magic of the Horcrux, and who'd almost fallen victim to it. Draco who'd needed saving again. But he couldn't voice any of that, and Harry was already continuing.
"I never meant to make you feel like I didn't want you, like I didn't care. That's as far from the truth as could be possible."
"It was the locket talking, Harry," Draco said automatically.
"Yes, but the locket draws on fears that are already there, doesn't it?"
Harry shook his head.
"I've worn it before you. I know how it works. When it was me, he kept bringing up the idea that you were all in danger because of me, that I was responsible because I was dragging you along, and I didn't have a clue what I was doing. And especially after Ron got hurt, the fear of losing you flared up again. I know we talked about this, and rationally I know that you've made a choice, and are fully aware of what you've gotten yourself into, but when I was wearing the locket, it just spiraled out of control again, and I found it hard to even look at you, Draco."
He took a shaky breath.
"So I know that these things you were feeling earlier, they weren't Horcrux induced, so to speak. They were there, buried deep inside of you, and the Horcrux just drew them out."
Draco gulped, unsure what to say in response. It was the truth, and he knew it. Harry tightened his arms around him, pressing his lips to his forehead. He lingered there, just breathing against Draco's skin before he continued speaking.
"I love you so much, Draco. I love you so much that most of the time I'm terrified of my own feelings. I feel like he must know, and he'll try to take you away from me, and I wouldn't survive that. Just the thought of his Horcruxes have now twice almost succeeded in killing you."
"They didn't!" Draco started to protest, but Harry cut him off.
"You were going to drown yourself. Don't deny it."
And Harry was crying now, clinging to him.
"If we had been too late."
"You weren't," Draco breathed. Harry whimpered, just holding him for a moment. Shudders went through his body as he cried, and Draco's own arms went around his waist, automatically reaching out to comfort him. It was a basic instinct of his.
I love you.
Harry sobbed, pressing a wet kiss against his temple.
I'm so sorry I pushed you so far away that you thought you didn't matter to me. I didn't realize. Why am I always doing that?
It's not your fault, Draco said, his voice small. You have the world on your shoulders. I shouldn't be adding to that.
Draco, you're not a burden,
Harry insisted, finally pulling away enough to catch his eyes. His face was smeared with tears and his eyes were red and swollen, but he looked determined all the same.
You're the opposite of a burden. From the day that I met you, I couldn't believe how lucky I was to have someone like you in my life.
Draco's throat felt tight at those words, but it seemed like Harry didn't need an answer. He leaned in to press a kiss to Draco's lips, tender but insistent all the same.
I love you,
he whispered.
I love you so much. Please believe me.
You've never said that before today, Draco breathed. I wanted to, but I didn't want to scare you, because
you were afraid that I didn't feel as deeply as you did.
Harry finished closing his eyes.
I really screwed this up.
He took a shaky breath before continuing.
I didn't want to jinx it. Saying it out loud felt like tempting fate, so I didn't.
He shook his head and held Draco a little tighter.
I'm not going to be that stupid anymore, he murmured. I'm going to make sure you know exactly how much I love you, so that something like today doesn't happen again.
An apology was on the tip of Draco's tongue again, but before he could get it out, Harry was kissing him again, urgent and desperate, like he wanted to imprint himself on Draco. And Draco just let his eyes fall closed and gave himself over to it, weak to Harry's affection. It had been so long since Harry had kissed him like that. These past few weeks they had been walking on eggshells around each other, and Draco had missed this so much. The physical intimacy and Harry reaching out for him, kissing him like he was unable to contain himself. For a while, Draco had almost convinced himself that he had lost this. He didn't realize that he was crying until Harry's fingers wiped away the tear tracks and he broke the kiss to whisper apologies and words of reassurance.
I'm so sorry, Draco. I love you.
I love you too, Draco whispered, his voice trembling. Please, kiss me again. And Harry did, his fingers curling in Draco's hair as he wrapped himself around the other boy, as if trying to swallow him up completely. And Draco was grateful for it, because like this, with Harry all around him, kissing him and holding him and surrounding him completely, it was easier to drown out the lingering doubts in his mind, the ones that had been there all along, but that the locket had brought to the surface, and that were hard to shake off completely now. So he let Harry take over, let him try to chase away his demons, and he was nothing if not dedicated. He kissed and kissed and kissed him as if Draco was going to disappear once he stopped, and his hands roamed over Draco's body, tracing his shoulders and back and arms and waist and any part of him he could reach. When Draco shivered against him, though, Harry halted, pulling away to frown at him, expression more than a little concerned.
You're still freezing,
he pointed out. It's getting better, Draco shrugged.
Not quickly enough.
He shook his head.
How long were you in that pond? Never mind, I don't want to know.
He moved to get up, but when Draco protested, he smiled at him and pecked his lips.
I'll be right back,
he promised.
1 sec.
Draco let him go reluctantly, and Harry got to his feet. First he drew out his wand and cast a warming charm over Draco. Then he picked up Hermione's beaded bag and summoned something. When Draco saw what he was holding, he stared at Harry, appalled. What is that monstrosity? He demanded, pointing at the giant lump of cloth in Harry's arms.
It used to belong to Dudley.
Harry shrugged. I thought you threw all of Dudley's hand-me-downs out, Draco called. I gave you all these birthday presents with real clothes that fit you way better.
I know.
Harry smiled, dropping Dudley's sweater on the bed next to Draco and slipping out of the one he was wearing.
I only kept a few things. This one I kept because it's big enough to wear above a lot of other layers, and it's really warm.
He then picked up Dudley's sweater and pulled it over his head. Indeed, it was so big that Harry could have fit in twice. Draco raised an eyebrow at him questioningly. "Get out of your own sweater," Harry told him, slipping back under the cover. "Excuse me?" Draco asked, confused. Harry just rolled his eyes, reaching for the hem himself, and Draco let out an indignant squeak as Harry undressed him. "Okay," Harry nodded, discarding Draco's sweater on the floor. "Now get in here with me." "What in Merlin's name were you talking about, Harry?" Draco demanded, but Harry had already grasped his wrist and pulled up the hem of Dudley's giant sweater. Then Draco found himself pulled against Harry and smothered by that crime against fashion. Only with some maneuvering and them almost banging their heads together did he manage to resurface, his head through the collar, though he had slung his arms around Harry's bare torso instead of the sleeves. "There," Harry smiled, his arms going around Draco to pull him flush against his body. "Better. They say body heat works wonders for hypothermia." Draco raised his eyebrows, but he had to admit that he felt a little warmer like that. Harry's bare skin was exuding a raw heat that he wanted to wrap himself up in and never surface from. Before he knew it, he was sighing and leaning his head against Harry's shoulder. "Have you always been so warm?" he murmured. "You've just never been so cold," Harry muttered, turning his head to kiss Draco's cheekbone. "Please, Draco, don't ever scare me like that again. I can't stand it." "Sorry," Draco whispered, blindly angling his face for another kiss. Harry met him halfway, pressing their lips together with such tenderness that Draco felt like he was going to come apart from it. He clung to Harry's waist and parted his lips, urging Harry to deepen the kiss, so relieved he could have cried again when he did. But no, that would have ruined the mood, and he wouldn't have that, not when Harry was finally touching and kissing him like he had before they left Hogwarts, before this whole mess had started. He could almost imagine that they were back in the room of requirement for Draco's birthday, Harry kissing him with such focused attention that Draco was ready to believe that nothing else existed in the world but him. The end of this chapter contains mature content, and therefore will not be posted on the channel for the general public. However, it is available for the members.